The average temperature in the month of January for Green Bay, Wisconsin is 12 degrees. There are over 500 homeless individuals residing in homeless shelters and transitional living programs on any given night. We will have over 500 individuals come to our doors for shelter.
Tony and I have an organization called Streetlights Outreach. We were spending a lot of time late at night out on the streets, and we just saw that there was a gap in the system, and we would find places along the East River where homeless people were bedding down, and when the weather was getting cold, we were concerned. Sometimes they would sleep on the floor of the crisis center. They were sleeping in the booths at the Blackstone Cafe. The police would tell us someone would throw a brick through a window downtown and just wait for the police to show up so that they would be taken to jail, where they'd have a warm place to stay and a meal.
One of the first guys we ever saw out on the streets, his name was Rooster.
Oh, yeah.
Rooster.
Oh, yeah.
So he never made it to a place like this.
Nope.
Because it wasn't open by the time he died out on the streets. But Rooster, he was a vet.
Rooster watched his best friend get shot next to him in a foxhole. You know, it's just part of his story, and that just had so much pain that came with that. But one of the stories that Rooster told us that has never left me was that the hardest thing for him about being homeless, it wasn't sleeping on the cold sidewalks, it wasn't going hungry. Those things were difficult, but he managed those. The hardest thing for him was how people would avoid him, how he would sit on a bench and people would cross the street to not have to walk past him. And that sense of being avoided by other human beings and being pushed away and marginalized, that was the hardest thing. That, I just remember that having a profound impact on my understanding of how to treat homeless people and the dignity they need and deserve.
I think there's a lot of people in our community who come down to St. John's for the first time, and there's a fear. And I think by taking a step out of themselves, out of their comfort zone, that fear will be totally overcome, and it'll be replaced by love.
My name is Jim O'Neill. I'm an attorney. I have my law firm here in Green Bay, and right next door to the homeless shelter here.
This is my neighbor, St. John's.
Well, to be quite blunt, I didn't pay attention to it. It wasn't something that affected me. I felt I had a blind eye towards the homeless. I chose to ignore it. Sitting in my corner office, and every day I would see the ebb and flow of the guests at the shelter. I just realized that I needed to get involved. One of my first times volunteering here, and my duties downstairs were to be in the locker room where we handed out the totes. And I sat there and realized that everybody that was coming in, all of their possessions, were basically contained in a 5-gallon plastic Tupperware container. And then we'd hand them out, we checked them in, checked off their names, and then I watched them as the evening went on, laying out the mats where they're all laying down. And I just stood up on the little balcony area where the locker rooms are, and I realized that it brought me back to the time I was over in northern Iraq, and this goes back to 1991, when we were helping the Kurds out from coming down from the mountains, and we dealt with those people that were in desperate need, and everything they owned they carried on their back. And I realized that night I'm looking at the exact same situation that I saw back in 1991 in northern Iraq, where these people owned nothing. Everything they owned was in a plastic 5-gallon container. And that was the night I decided that I have to stop judging. I have to stop whatever perceptions, misconceptions I had regarding why they're homeless or what they can do to help themselves. I had to stop. I had to stop judging them, and I had to help them and care for them to the best of my abilities.
Our mom, she just told us that someone, like a homeless person, he was in the dumpster and he, to get out of the storm, and then the next day, the dump truck came and he was in it and they just dumped him and he died. And we really wanted to help other people that really need it. We just decided that we wanted to raise the money and give it to them, and so they could buy a house, clothing and food, everything that they need.
When she said they wanted to do it, and I said, well, perfect, I could build a stand and you guys paint it, and then the girls could kind of run it.
We both take turns, like I'll set up the cups and she'll serve the lemonade and I get the money, and then we take turns doing it. Yeah, we mostly just like work together. It makes my heart like beat really fast, and it gives me a lot of joy. Yeah, I feel really happy and really joyful, and yeah.
When I started at the shelter back in 2012, I had been employed just a couple of months when the first letter within my tenure came in. I remember reading this letter, and it was from an elderly woman in the community, and she had included just this note about her son and her son's personal struggle. I just remember feeling connected. I felt connected to this woman with the first letter I read, in which she shared this struggle that her son had with alcohol addiction. And over time, these letters would come in every couple months, and I started to piece them together, and I started to recognize that return address label. And I would always put it at the end of the stack for the day because I knew I wanted to be able to sit in it. I knew that I was going to get an update of how her son was doing, whether he was doing well or not doing well, and that she would tie it into why she was making a contribution at that point in time. November 12th, 2013. Enclosed contribution given once again in honor of my son, who deals with alcohol addiction each and every day, who has no permanent address, who has hardly a friend in the world, and tomorrow will turn 45 years old. In a world where not many recognize people like this who are in such dire straits, this mother is grateful for a hardworking organization as your own, who are willing to welcome the less fortunates by name and welcome them. Thank you. Her son has never sought shelter services with us, but we as an organization, we as a leadership team feel like we've been able to walk this journey with her. It's a picture of humanity, and it's a picture of a mom who loves her son and feels like, I'm sure feels helpless in so many ways to help her son heal. And yet she has found this small way with such big impact to show love for her son by reaching out and loving other people that are perhaps struggling in a similar way. So often we see the worst the world has to offer. We see the trauma, we see the pain, we see the brokenness. And yet, in the middle of all of that, we get to see the absolute best the world and this community has to offer, and we get to bring that together. And that's amazing. And I think just a beautiful picture of community.
We're given these gifts, we're given this time, we're given this narrow space that we call life. And we all face the question, what are we gonna do with that life that has meaning? And ultimately, you can either find meaning in what you do for yourself, which really doesn't extend any further than the edges of your own self, or you can find meaning in what you're doing for other people. Everyone has some sort of giftedness that's just waiting to be shared with the world.
Make a commitment tonight regarding your time, your talent, and your treasure.
I am St. John's.
I am St. John's.
I am St. John's.
I am St. John's.
And I am St. John's.